am I feeling so good? Why am I feeling so strong? Why am I feeling when things could
Put this up here, and you give it a mighty thought. That was better. We broke.
Nobody asked you had any skills. They just said go down and do it.
Love has made me see things in a different way.
I don't remember any talent we had that could be termed professional, at least at the outset.
It was very creative in those days. We made it up as we went along.
It was just great fun, frankly.
The way to cut the linoleum is to first score it.
Which isn't always easy.
And this may not be too important, but on the other hand, it may be too.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Go south, little bear, where the sun shines. Look at that grin on his face.
Schooling itself should not be restricted to merely the elite.
Hello, and welcome to a strange time in America, a time when the furniture suddenly started to glow. I'm Greg Palmer, and I'd like to share some stories with you about a lot of brave folks standing in front of pegboard, trying desperately not to sweat. People I grew up watching, or claiming I watched, in the hopeful shades of gray days of Channel 9. An anniversary is a good time to remember that Kcts wasn't always on the old Philco dial. So return with us now to those thrilling days of 1948, before KCTS, when Seattle was a one-channel town.
My dad bought a television set, and the test pattern was the big thing. Wow, watch the Indian. I said, man, that was it. Got to watch the test pattern. Coming on at 5 o'clock, got to be there, you know.
You had to have a TV light on either on top of the screen or a light surrounding the screen, or we were all going to go blind.
Because we sat there with the blinds pulled all summer long watching that tube, you know.
People would meet where someone had a television and other people did in the block, and they would meet. There were great social programs.
All of a sudden, there was this wonderful thing called television in our homes.
To the ends of the earth, I'll follow my star. To the ends
KRSC-TV came on the air in 1948. That was Channel 5. That was the name of it then, because it was owned by the Radio Sales Corporation.
Mother bought it.
It was very chancy, and I was very much afraid of it, but I thought we could maybe swing it.
I first went on television with Art Bardoon, and we had a little 15-minute show called Two Bees at the Keys, and that was in 1949.
A merry Texacoman. Tonight we may be showmen. Tomorrow we'll be servicing your cars.
We saw what was happening on the East Coast, so we knew that it was the coming thing, you know, and that was it. And we were just thrilled and honored to be chosen to be on the television.
Milton Berle was the big one. Some people bought television sets in order to see Milton Berle.
It was either live or it was on film, and it was ratty looking because the film in those days was soft focus, because the equipment just wasn't as sophisticated.
When a few stations started to go on the air, they soon discovered that they had miscalculated a lot of things, and that television signals were reaching into a lot of places that they never had expected them to reach.
We're talking serious primitive here.
So the freeze was put on by the FCC so that the engineers could work all these things out. They had to really start over again from scratch.
Singing humpety bumpety, roar and a growl, roar and a growl, roar and a growl.
Hold that note, Dave. This is Dave Eddy of Let's Sing and Play. And if he seems anxious, he was. The license freeze was important in educational TV history because while engineers were trying to figure out why Iowa milking machines were broadcasting the Camel News Caravan, the Federal Communications Commission had time to think about stuff. During the 4-year freeze, the FCC kicked around the bizarre notion of nonprofit educational channels. And thanks to pressure from Dorothy Bullitt and others, when the freeze ended, Channel 9s across the country, including Seattle's, were up for grabs to any organization that promised not to make a dime out of them.
So it became the interest of the Seattle Public Schools to begin to learn how they could use it for instruction. The University of Washington was interested. Seattle University, the public library, the King County schools, and I think the Boy Scouts were also interested.
The critics, the Post-Intelligencer was a heavy critic.
Seattle schools are asking for more money.
As was the Municipal League, who published a pamphlet railing against establishing an educational station when the school districts and the university were already hard-pressed for money. Things looked very chancy until Mrs. Bullitt called on Dr. Allen, who was president of the University of Washington, and donated $182,000 worth of equipment.
They didn't want it. They refused it. She talked to some professors over at the UW, and they just said, no, this is ridiculous. This is just a toy. Nobody ever learns anything from pictures. So then Mother went to Governor Langley. By then she was determined that this opportunity not be overlooked.
I love the looks of you, the lure of you. I'd love to make a tour of you.
The university gave in and applied for the license on behalf of an odd group of interested parties, from the Junior League to the Boy Scouts. Broadcasting makes strange bedfellows. The FCC, remember them, told the UW to build a studio, raise money, train a staff, get a zillion advisors, program the station, and get it on the air, and all in a year's time, or lose the permit. And probably because all those good community folks were video virgins, they said, hey, no problem.
So a whole brand new crew of people who had very little, if any, experience in producing television programs got their heads together and did a lot of rehearsing, a lot of learning, and working up toward that December date when we were scheduled to have our inaugural broadcast.
The transmitter was operated by the Seattle Public Schools, who at that time ran Edison Technical School.
Some of our gear was secondhand from one source or another, and a lot of it was put together by students from Edison Tech who spent a lot of time working for the station and learning at the same time.
Okay, now.
The schools had a curriculum committee, which was made up of curriculum people from all the schools in the area. We had meeting after meeting after meeting to discuss what we could do in terms of what they wanted in the classroom.
The way they raised money, as far as the schools were concerned, they charged $1 per student, and that became about 75% of the operating budget of Channel 9.
The management of Channel 9 thought that it should be lots of talking heads with lots of information. There wasn't any need for bells or whistles.
Lawrence Stone was the first manager of Channel 9, of course.
He came from KIRO radio.
But Lorne was of the most conservative wing of educational broadcasters. He resented any form of, any hint of commercialism.
The entire new conception.
One of the big ideas about the educational television, which is what we called ourselves then, was that it was an alternative to what was available on commercial television.
No commercials. While KCTS was trying to rewire King's old equipment, King was playing with color, as was KOMO, the new guy in town. Just flags and test patterns, but color nonetheless. Cairo, by the way, was still just a city in Egypt for most of us, because the eventual station owner, Saul Haas, was up to his format in hearings with the FCC. Remember them? Fortunately, competition and technological advances weren't worrying the KCTS crew.
I worked out a schedule after careful planning with the curriculum committee and took it with fear and trembling to Milo Ryan, who was at that time the program director for the station. And I sort of wanted his approval of what we were going to broadcast. I gave it to him, and he looked at it with a very serious expression on his face, and he said,
I think we're about ready to get in our boat and get it ready for sailing.
Oh, the tugboat is pulling in the alley, alley, oh.
Hang on there, Dave.
Of course, the great interruption that almost seemed to be our ruin was the unanticipated, of course, fire that almost destroyed the entire wiring and engineering part of the studio itself.
Burned up the control room, burned up the announce booth, burned up a lot of the stuff, so they frantically went to work to get it, fixed, and they couldn't get the announce booth fixed. So they decided to use the furnace room. So we'd go in the furnace room, there was a monitor and headset, turn off the furnace, get ready to take the cue over the headset, read the breaks, and shut the furnace back on and go out and do something, and then go back in there a half hour later and shut the furnace off.
We were able to get on the air very close to the announced date when Channel 9 was due to be a reality.
Those were exciting times for this little station.
Now, Dave.
Ready.
Ha, ha, this away, ha, ha, that away.
Go.
KCTS.
I can't stop them. Curl.
Henry.
We see the fire coming around Brunhilde.
Welcome.
Oh, my stars, who is that slim lady with black hair?
Welcome to Puppet Playhouse Workshop.
I was so nervous I could hardly talk.
Here's our model of the atom.
Hallowed by children. I can't remember the words well enough. Hallowed by children's patient eyes.
Have you ever seen a bullfrog before? What do you think he eats?
Soap.
Well, we got off to a bang today. Put it back on again, Billy, and see if it'll work.
I was teaching 5th grade. While I was teaching full-time, I was cooking this thing up, and then we would grab up the kids. Oh, this little girl on here, I wish I could remember her name.
This is a spark plug.
All right, a spark plug, and what's inside the box?
Spark coil.
A spark coil. Now, this is rather temperamental. We put in 3 drops of gasoline, and we put a stopper on the top, and when B pushes this and a spark goes through, if we're lucky, we're going to see a little bit of internal combustion. If not, why, we'll give her a second try. Go ahead, B, and we'll see what happens here.
It was one of these things that, come to school in the morning and get the class started and turn it over to a substitute, pick up the kids and drive down in my car and unload everything, set it all up, run the program.
I'm generating and nothing is happening.
Pick it all up.
We took this one apart in class once.
Go back, pick up the class, and finish the day.
By golly, if it doesn't go this week, we'll try next week and every week until this series is over.
You kind of picked yourself up and dusted yourself off when things went wrong, but it wasn't the end of the world.
I wonder what could be keeping Mrs. Squirrel.
I don't think we had any budget. Maybe we had $5 to just throw around. But in essence, it came out of our own pockets.
Well, let's see
Okay.
how much we've got. How much is one ticket, Mr.
Well,
Booth?
one ticket is 10 cents.
It was a blast. It was a chance to be involved in something that was new and was exciting. And for some reason, they seemed to be willing to give me the chance to experiment.
Can you feel a few beginning to sprout? Are your ears kind of pointed and furry?
Escuchen. Son las 3. Repitan.
Termina a las 3.
And then they would repeat it.
Comienza a las 8.
Like that, and back and forth. Everything repeated many, many, many times. The stage was a small little, well, it wasn't a stage, it was a cubicle. And I had a blackboard in the back, which I pinned up the visuals. There was no teleprompter. My cheat sheets were all over the floor. Computers would have been really useful at that time, or even Velcro.
And now we come to a most important area.
Listen.
Johnny could only sing one note, and the note he sang was this.
I have a friend, a doctor, a good friend, a doctor.
Poor Johnny, one note. sang
So when
out with
KCTS finally got on the air, the plan was, visual aid, Monday through Friday, 1:15 to 2:15, into the classroom, with shows that followed the curriculum and came with study guides for teachers. Then 5 to 6, young people's programming for all of us kids who weren't allowed to watch Stan Boris and...
She's got so many hats, it's hard to tell which one. Thin ones, fat ones, white ones, green ones, blue ones, and talk about your beanie hats.
Sheriff Tex. Wonder. Because our parents were anti-anything but educational television. In other words, weird parents. From 7 to 9, adults who had enough of Robert Young's infallibility on Father Knows Best and policemen like Broderick Crawford and Victor Jory, who never took off their hats, could turn to Channel 9 for Shakespeare, child-rearing tips, and less fancy shows.
The teacher acts as a choral director and leads the children in responding. She moves about the room, helping and encouraging individual children to participate.
Yeah? TVs were in the library. You check them out and use them according to a schedule.
The PTAs bought the first television sets that were available in the classroom.
And with rabbit ears, Channel 9 was a little weak at that time. Couldn't get a very good program. And one of our principals, Albert Honeycutt, got the idea of getting a Yagi antenna, and he got an old broomstick, and he mounted it on the broomstick and fastened that to the television cart, and then we'd wheel that from room to room.
And when Mrs. Arkley wheeled it into our third grade room, I looked over at little Dougie Hosner at the next desk, and we thought, great, Lassie, Davy Crockett, cartoons in school. Then the glow came up, and I heard...
Are you ready to work today? Oh, of course you're ready to work today.
This is a program to help you learn to speak more correctly. We hope you will listen and then speak clearly. Your television teacher is Miss Ada Miner.
Hello.
Today we have an impression of television based upon so many marvelous electronic possibilities. But when Channel 9 was starting out...
We had 2 cameras, great big boxes.
Square wheels.
No zooms.
Clunky.
And when King or Como or Cairo would use the camera or the tube long enough so it would start to burn in, you would start to get an after image, we would get them. And we would use them until they were completely destroyed, and then we would store them under the floor for spares.
It took a lot of patience, a lot of skill, a lot of maintenance, and a lot of ingenuity to keep all that stuff wired together.
Anything that happens in life can happen on the screen. Fantasies appear, colorful and queer. Watch me.
Be careful how you wield that stick. We don't want you to put on a Punch and Judy act here.
Oh, it was crazy. It was once a week, and I would hurry up and decide what we were going to do.
Tonight, you know, we're going to make balloon puppets.
Nobody really knew anything about it, and so they said, would you do the puppet show? And I was always eager to spread the gospel of puppetry. So I said, oh, yes.
And before you can bat your eyelash, I'll bet I'll have a couple of helping hands out here. Helping hands, helping hands. There they are. Here we come.
You have to have a balance between what you show, what you direct, and what you allow the children to do on their own.
How's Dorothy of the Spoon coming?
Nowadays, everything is done for them. You don't have to imagine anything.
You've made real progress. Here's Dorothy.
Imagination is more important than knowledge.
You'll see just what I mean. Watch me.
I think it looks tremendous.
Buttons and His Buddies was a program done by the zoo, and they sent one of the zookeepers down every week.
Hi, Jack.
Jack Alexander would bring these animals, and could be anything, snakes or lizards or monkeys or kinkajous or turkeys or elephants or pigeons, and you would sometimes have birds in the grid, and they'd be there for days.
Buttons was a monkey, but Buttons was not always the same monkey. I hate to break that to an adult. Right now, there was a child, and the monkey changed.
Buttons himself was a macaque monkey.
A chimp.
Spider monkey?
For a while, the monkey Buttons was a kinkajou. I think they thought, shoot it wide and the audience won't know the difference.
Here is a uncooked egg. I wonder what Buttons will do with it.
Along with Buttons, they brought an elephant.
A little elephant kicked the back of the trailer down and started across the campus.
I was on a headset, of course, in the studio. Newman, go get that elephant. It's a small elephant, but an elephant's an elephant.
But the worst animal we ever got in there was the Thanksgiving turkey. Those things are crazy.
Hello, boys and girls. Isn't spring a wonderful time of the year to take a walk through the woods?
Teachers don't like to go out and swing an axe and split logs and stumps open to get these termites.
Let's pretend that this is the top of the termites and look down inside and we see the termite stomach.
And they don't like to go out and wander into the ponds with their shoes on to get spring peepers. And when the spring peepers were singing out in nature, they were in front of them on TV.
Hey there, you with the stars in your eyes.
Let's take a look at some of the features of the home of the mole.
It was part of me. The ecological biology was part of me.
Well, what is your pet, Bruce?
It's a mole.
Would you like to dig it out so you can show the boys and girls what your mole looks like?
When camera B and the red light went on there and I was being shot directly and I knew that there was no trauma because all I saw were children.
Those were really pioneer days, and we sort of felt our way along, and if we had successes, we were delighted, and if we had failures, we said, okay, we'll pick up the pieces and move from here.
Oh, I wonder how that got in there.
Well, there's a June bug. That's the biggest beetle of the Pacific Northwest. It's 1.25 inches long, and it makes the funniest...
Love never made a fool of you. You used to be too wise.
Good evening.
I get no kick from champagne
to attain science.
Mere alcohol doesn't thrill me at all.
I don't think so.
So tell me, why should it be true that I get a kick out of
Educational television. There was no way to measure the audience for primetime Channel 9, so success was not how many people were watching KCTS, but how many people wanted to be KCTS. The university built a new drama TV building on campus to accommodate the line of people with show ideas. And if you were to queue up there to teach fly casting or trigonometry, chances are you'd be in line with the Art Museum, the Urban League, every UW department head, and your next-door neighbor, Mrs. Crenshaw, who was clutching her cat and pitching Pet Grooming, a 24-part series.
I wasn't hired to go into a closet and come up with an idea for a show. I was hired to help any one of a number of agencies throughout the city that I might be assigned to work with to tell their story.
Here are Ed Thomas and Dorothy Lahr of the Seattle Art Museum with another chapter of Man's Story.
And this would be attached to the helmet, and the idea, of course, was to make you just as ferocious looking as possible.
This was remarkable because Dr. Fuller allowed objects, many objects, to be packed up and brought to the studio, unpacked, put out on tables, handled, shown.
And this jar may look very crumpled and odd to you.
And while you would hope that everyone could come down and see the original work of art, if they can't, this is the next best.
This is the Washington family. Joe Washington and his sons came down to the Kcts studio to do this dance, which was a very, very unusual privilege.
This is a rattle which is made of deer hoofs.
Dr. Erna Gunther was an anthropologist and devoted much of her life to studying the native peoples of the Northwest. She was extremely knowledgeable.
These spirits come back into the Puget Sound country, and at that time the Indians received them as welcome visitors.
While she was here, she was a rich treasure for the Northwest.
Opera with Chappell. Stanley Chappell, I adored the man. I absolutely adored the man. I was working operas with him, and it was because of him, frankly, that to this day I love opera.
Good evening. I'm not going to sing, but I'll play the piano. But on the other hand, you may hear a few grunts and groans, and that will be me. And Tarquinius, with true trust and grace, bows over Lucretia's hand, then lifts it with slow deliberation to his lips, and then he sings. There's a theme, just like in a Beethoven symphony. Why didn't you recognize it? Perhaps you did, but most of you perhaps didn't. Listening to music demands attention. Orchestra, soloist.
Chappell as a man was a tremendous human being.
Thank you very much.
Public perception of Channel 9 was probably
somewhat dry. It was a little pedantic. And publicity was very hard for the station to come by.
I first want to say I'm thoroughly embarrassed by the whole thing, given this many years later, Miss Channel 9.
We all came in, went through auditions and so forth, and there were about a dozen of us selected.
Norman is looking for women who will write and read promotional spots for upcoming shows. Plans call for one girl to be Miss Channel 9 each night of the week.
And we hope that this evening you'll stay tuned for University Conversations. And if you can stay with us through that, we'd also like you to see Buttons and His Buddies.
The 60s. The FDA gave us the pill. The White House gave us Camelot.
Just as I suspected! Just as I suspected!
J.P. Patch's Gertrude gave us Drag for Kids. And Channel 9 was still determined to give us an education about everything.
Rope hangs securely from something above, you hope?
They had all sorts of how-to shows, and one of them, of course, was mountain climbing. And, you know, there's so many mountains around, it's such a popular sport.
And they used to yodel at the front of that show.
Very attractive bowling bags.
Bowling, how to bowl in the studio.
I produced a show called Spoken Ping Pong. It was a great show, great show.
And only the face is exposed. Away she goes.
That's my wife and mother of my 4 children. By the way, same wife, same boat.
Keep yourself down and back, just about as I am positioned now.
Dr. Lou West was the water ski teacher, and he was terrific. I mean, he was an actual teacher and an actual doctor.
Yes, we did demonstrate in studio. It's practically impossible to do this, so we did it. How to deep water start a pair of water skis. The hardest part is getting the stupid things on in the water.
My assignment at that time was just to say, you know, now let's watch him do this and let's look at that again.
I think this is going to be interesting.
Well, it's going to be a wet show anyway.
Honestly, I produced a ping pong show.
Really?
University Conversation was I thought a wonderful, wonderful interview show, and I'll tell you why. Delightful gentleman did it, Lyndon Mander.
The community must accept. And so one of the first things is, where are the leaders of the community?
What I learned from this man that I still have used today is that he would sit down across from somebody, as you and I are sitting, and he would ask them a question.
You saw that in Italy, didn't you?
And he would listen to their answer. A bit of a revelation.
What are you doing here in community development? And does it have any relation to the kind of things that are being done in Uganda or Kenya or South Italy or what have you?
He was an eloquent interviewer, a brilliant man.
I wasn't wanting to discuss myself, but to find out what you were doing.
Lyndon Mander was indeed a wonderful man. He was also my grandfather. Like a lot of people in Seattle, I had a personal connection to this community station. For me, it was University Conversations with Grandpa Lynn. I'd like to be able to say that I loved watching it, that watching was a weekly ritual for my family, gathering together around the Philco to see our paterfamilias do his stuff. But I was 10, and the competition was Rin Tin Tin and Superman, and my Grandpa Lynn, a man of great generosity, always understood that.
You're gonna hear from me.
In the upbuilding of Seattle, we had some wonderful men. Patriotic, my dear, they full of Seattle spirit.
Joshua Green, the former shipping magnate and later prominent Seattle banker. And I do believe at the age of 96 or 7, which he was, I think it was the first time he'd ever been on television.
He'd said all of his enemies were dead, so he thought he could do a TV show, but it turned out they weren't. So several other civic leaders were more than happy to come along and do shows.
Dr. Charles E. Odegaard, president of the University of Washington.
This has been a visit with Cecilia Schultz, Dr. and Mrs. Richard Fuller. Visit with Gordon Clinton. Our host is Hobe Sullivan.
Hi, welcome again. I was a businessman in Seattle, and they had these funds that came from Pancho to put these people on tape so they would be remembered.
Nice to get these things on record.
Certainly it is.
Yes, you can't go back on them.
No, and as you say, nobody can refute them.
No.
One of the reasons that those early shows look so unsophisticated is that all of this was done live.
Normally what we would do if we had a mistake, we would just stop the whole program, go back to the beginning and run through it.
Well, are we through?
We're all through.
Was everything okay?
Everything was fine?
We were here to supply information, and that was all.
Just doing straightforward, quote-unquote, educational could get to you after a while. So many of us who were younger, directors there at the time, would look for ways to do musical programs, opera, a dramatic piece here and there, dance. So you'd try to do those. They were great fun.
In order that you may understand fully what you are about to see and hear, I feel I must tell you something that happened to a certain author's typewriter.
God, I was pontificating, obviously.
And there was a gigantic cockroach jumping about on the keys.
I died, and my spirit migrated into the shell of a cockroach.
Marquis was a columnist, and he created this concept of a cockroach who jumped up and down on the keyboard of his typewriter in the evening when he was gone. And the cockroach wrote about characters in the cockroach's life.
Was that not a beautiful song he was singing as I took him to my bosom?
And there was Mehitable cat, and there were parrots and all sorts of wonderful characters. There was a moth, for example, who was always hurling herself at the flame.
We tried all kinds of avant-garde things, at least we thought so in those days.
One condition must be met.
When Ralph Rosenbaum, who had normally produced an opera on campus, came to Channel 9 and said, "They're tearing down my hall." Meany Hall was the theater that he had used, and it was old and ready for renovation. So he wasn't going to have a venue to do his opera. And he had in mind that maybe he would choose something that could be done on television.
Stop, stop, stop.
First of all, black and white is right. I mean, if you were to do Markheim in color, it would be wrong. And one of the reasons it was chosen is that Kcts didn't have color, and this was very suitable because of the dark, somber tones of the whole piece.
It's remarkable.
The funny thing about it was presented to PBS as a program, and they just thought it was really clever that we had done this show in black and white, when in fact that's all we had was black and white television.
Okay, so the rest of the planet was in color. Big deal. Nine's audience was growing when the 70s hit, thanks in large part to a big yellow bird. Well, here he was still gray.
My granny bird once
And a man with a heart of gold.
I like every part of you.
But the neighborhood was changing. Ed Sullivan was out, Dick Cavett in. The 747 went up, and the price of the computer started coming down. The pace picked up, and we picked up the remote control.
On through the 60s into the early 70s, which we know was really a tough time in our country, where we thought it was coming apart all around us. We did weekly television programs about social issues, urban issues, statewide issues on a weekly basis.
Slade Gordon.
Senator Jackson, what are the chances that Seattle might not be able to have any of this land of Fort Lawton as a park for the city?
Well, we've already been assured by the Army.
There were so many outwardly active things happening in those days that we just sort of kept up with it, really.
And I hope you'll be with me next Friday for another Seattle Profile. Thanks for listening today.
Actually, I left King, and that was when I became aware of KCTS, because KCTS at that time was very open to letting people come in, use their equipment. Of course, all this was for free.
My name is Roberta Bird, the name of the program, Face to Face.
I considered it such a privilege to be able to develop a show with Roberta that I think we worked for, I shouldn't say this, but I think we worked for 2 years as volunteers.
Sergeant Shriver, the right-wing white community and the left-wing black community are in bed together against the war on poverty. What is your attitude toward this?
And Roberta was ruthless. She was ruthless.
They have established things for you to do so that you won't burn up Seattle this summer. How do you feel about that, Maurice?
We went back to King with the show, and King carried the show for about 5 years. Then we came back to KCTS, and so we raged through the community for 6 years.
This is Faces of the City.
But she breaks just like a little girl.
Kenneth Yend, who was still program director, was very concerned the Watergate hearings were going to be televised, but the stations were being encouraged to accept an edited version.
And particularly with reference to the President of the United States, I'd like to say this.
I was adamant that we should not allow anyone to edit anything of such major importance.
It is my honest belief that while the President was involved...
So we ran it.
And I think that when the facts come out...
We ran it in its entirety.
I hope the President is forgiven.
If there was anyone who hadn't heard of KCTS before, they certainly had after Watergate.
Hello.
Dr. Richie Meyer, the new Channel 9 station manager, arrived in this Washington just about the time Richie Nixon was leaving his Washington. KCTS had started buying a lot of national programs, so when Lawrence Stone retired, they bought a national manager, too.
Pleasure of the power and the flame.
Richie was aggressive in a non-Northwest sort of way. Some local folk thought he was exactly what KCTS needed, while others didn't.
For instance, my job changed from being a director to manager of utilization, which I could never figure out really what I was supposed to do.
When I first came to KCTS, it was like going into a time warp. I knew right away that we needed to get color equipment because all of the major market stations, all of the other public stations all over the country were in color.
The bottom line reared its ugly head.
He
We hope you enjoyed tonight's very special presentation of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra.
Well, first of all, they need more phones.
The very first person who called up to make a pledge was Mrs. Dorothy Bullock.
And from there just didn't seem to be any stopping the station.
Channel 9's televised auction, live from Dosey's in South Center.
He had allegedly been watching public television for 3 years and had never once joined or contributed.
For $25, you get a family membership.
Please don't let us fade away.
We bought new studio cameras, new film chains, and new tape machines, a new switcher.
That money was put into programs that were more detailed in some respects, scripted, put on videotape, highly edited.
This place where sea and freshwater meet is important.
To go back to a basic thing where one person is standing in front of a camera, as I say, with just a pointer and perhaps a piece of chalk, and have that have any impact is pretty hard to do.
I'm sure it's time for me to go.
I was lucky to be there at that time. It won't happen like that again.
At least I didn't give too much thought to what was impossible. I worked with the possible.
Goodbye now. Adios, niños. Until next week, happy bowling.
Goodbye!
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
What those gray, intense people did was give television not just a brain, but occasionally a heart and soul. They were doing it because they believed in it, believed in the medium, believed in the message, and believed in their audience. And we still do. Good night, Dave.
Come on, let's go exploring and see what else we can find. A-B-C, A-B-C, catch the tiger by the knee. D-N-E, F-N-G, is the tiger here to me. H-I-J, H-I-J, don't the tiger get away. L-N-M, N-N-O, let the poor old tiger go. A-B-C, A-B-C, catch a tiger by the knee. D-N-E, F-N-G, is the tiger here to me. H-I-J, H-I-J, don't the tiger get away. L-N-M, N-N-O, let the poor old tiger go.